Lawyers. What is the most outrageous case someone has asked you to take? Story 1. Had a case where a man refused to pay rent because his apartment smelled terrible and was making him sick. His landlord tried to evict him. A few days after taking the case and before his first hearing, the ceiling in his bathroom collapsed. Turns out some plumbing wasn't connected and his ceiling/walls had been filling with poop for weeks/months. The landlord settled pretty quickly after that. Wow, talk about a crazy mess. The tenant was totally in the right for refusing to pay rent because of the terrible smell and sickness it was causing. But man, it's a bummer that it took the ceiling collapsing and discovering of poop-filled walls for the landlord to finally take action. I guess sometimes it takes something major to happen for people to take notice, but let's hope the landlord learned their lesson and starts taking care of the building better in the future. Story 2. I got a call from a client I had represented in the past, wanting me to help out her son. He and his girlfriend wanted to get married, but she was under 18, so she needed permission from her parents and they wouldn't give her permission. We chatted about it for a while, and then she told me it was an urgent matter because the girl was pregnant. I said, wait, how old did you say she was? The mom said 14. And I said, and how old is your son? The mom said 20. I said, you need to hire a criminal defense lawyer to help you with this. And then I had to explain to her why her son had a bigger problem than not being able to get married. Story 3. My family member sued me for taking down their website. I created the website. I hosted the website. I had no problem doing it since they were family and it ran on my server. Unfortunately, they got too much traffic. They started being very hostile to my parents. I took down their site. I sent them a letter about how families should treat one another with a passworded zip of all their files. The password was at the bottom of the letter, so they had to read it to receive it. Got sued for 6 figures. They were pulling in at most $300 a month. They said that I did irreparable damage to their site and that they couldn't get the site online because it was impossible. In court, they brought the whole database printed out. When they showed it to me on the stand, I laughed because I told the judge that's all of the information that they said they couldn't receive or open. All the counts were in my favor. Best part was prior to our court session, my lawyer suggested highly that we settle out of court. I offered $10,000. They didn't take it. After they lost, their lawyer asked if we could just settle on the amount from the settlement. My lawyer told them to bog off. It was glorious. Talk about a wild ride. It sounds like this family member really took things to the extreme by suing you over a website, especially considering you created and hosted it for them for free. It's understandable that you had to take the website down due to the hostility from the family member and the traffic it was generating, and it's pretty hilarious when it came down to it in court. All the information that the family member claimed they couldn't access or open was right there in the printed out database. It's great that the case was ruled in your favor, and it's satisfying to know that your lawyer suggested settling out of court for 10 grand and they didn't take it, only to ask for it after they lost. That's definitely a case of sweet justice. Story 4. As a public defender, I defended a grown man accused of stealing magic cards from Walmart. There was an hour-long security video meticulously showing from dozens of angles that he was picking up sets of cards, unwrapping them, and discarding the wrappers around the store. He went to a jury trial instead of securing a plea deal. It took the jury 8 minutes to convict him, and the judge laid into my client, telling him that he was the worst thief he had ever seen. I forgot the best part. At one point in the trial, I had to spend 45 minutes explaining to the judge what magic cards are. He couldn't understand why anyone needed more than one deck. Story 5. When I was in law school, I clerked with a solo practitioner. Our client wanted to go to trial over a charge of impersonating a police officer. What happened that led up to this? One night, our client got drunk and ordered a pizza for delivery. Now, I've been there before. It can be frustrating to wait forever for that glorious, delicious pizza, especially in an inebriated state of mind. Well, this guy's genius idea to speed things up for himself was to call the pizza place back and tell them he was a police officer, and if they don't hurry it up, there would be trouble. However, as it turns out, the guy who answered the phone at the pizza place was a volunteer firefighter and asked for our client's name because he knew all the police officers in that town. When our client gave him his real name and inevitably it turned out that he was not in fact a police officer, a small investigation led to him being charged. Before trial, our client wanted us to argue he had a First Amendment right to tell people he was a cop. He doesn't. He ended up pleading out, but that case stood out in my mind. I represent corporate clients in IP matters now, and the stories are less exciting. This case sounds like a classic one for the books kind of situation. When you're drunk, it's not uncommon to make some poor decisions, but pretending to be a police officer just to get some pizza delivered faster is definitely taking it to the next level. It's funny how things can spiral out of control so quickly, especially when your client gave his real name to the volunteer firefighter. Story 6. I am an attorney practicing estate planning, wills and trust, probate. Not a week goes by that I don't hear a story about a family squabbling over an inheritance, but there was one guy in particular. He had an aunt who was a lesbian and had recently married her lifelong partner. His aunt died shortly after they were finally allowed to be legally married. Like many couples, they had a trust together, and as you would imagine, it left everything to the surviving spouse, and only when both of them died it was divided between other friends and relatives. The nephew was left with a fairly generous gift once both his aunt and her wife passed away. Apparently that wasn't good enough for him. He wanted to sue his aunt's widow to get his inheritance that he was entitled to now. I explained that wasn't really possible since the trust was very clear and it wasn't like his aunt left everything to her spouse under duress or anything like that. Also, the spouse had complete authority to change the trust and could theoretically cut him out of the trust entirely if she chose to. There is something that happens when you tell people something contrary to what they want to hear. When you give someone advice that conflicts with how they believe the world works, they get upset, flustered, and more entrenched in their position. They will ask the same question multiple ways just to get you to tell them the answer they want to hear. So he kept asking different ways how he could sue to get his inheritance, and I kept telling him that he would most likely lose the case and then not receive anything ever. Finally, he asked, "So what can I do?" My actual legitimate legal advice: you can be really nice to your aunt's wife. He stormed out of my office without saying a word. That was a first for me. His mother was there for the entire meeting and apologized for his behavior, saying he's upset. He was really close to his aunt. Right, it was absolutely clear where he developed his sense of entitlement from. I can't believe that kind of behavior. Personal story here: when my grandmother died, I was given a check, but I would have ripped it in half happily if I knew that it would bring her back instead. This young man's behavior is incredibly selfish and left a really bad taste in my mouth. Story 7. Family law attorney here. I just had a custody case go back to court over eyeglasses. My client didn't like the glasses her ex bought the kid. So stupid. I want to go back to criminal defense. Gang homicide cases had nicer people to deal with than family law. Someone added to this comment by saying, "I recall that the lawyer whom I first did work experience under described family law as the single most miserable, godforsaken profession that has ever existed upon this earth." Story 8. Lawyer in a small town here. I mostly do estate planning, probate, old people stuff, etc. I have a client that sued his ex-wife for not selling the house after the divorce, as she was supposed to. Judge held her in contempt and asked what he wanted my client to do, and he had her thrown in jail. They are both nearly 80 years old. The client also has something valuable buried on his property for his grandchildren after he dies. I have a sealed letter in my desk that he pays me a good sum each month to hold and give to his grandson when the old man dies. Story 9. During law school, I was a member of a legal clinic. We represented low-income individuals under the supervision of a licensed attorney/professor. We handled family law issues, but would try to point clients in the right direction if we could not personally help them. One man came in and stated that he wanted to sue Best Buy, which is not uncommon, but why he wanted to sue Best Buy was different. See, this man said he purchased a refurbished computer from Best Buy for his daughter as a Christmas present. Best Buy had neglected to remove the previous owner's password screen, and thus this man and his daughter were unable to access the computer until they took it back to Best Buy, which was understandably closed on Christmas Day. This, he said, caused his 12-year-old daughter to begin to question the very existence of Santa Claus. He and his daughter then argued the rest of the day until finally he admitted to her that there was, spoiler alert, no Santa Claus. His words were, "Seeing your daughter lose faith in Santa ruined all Christmases to come." He also claimed that now his daughter was a real pain since she had stopped believing in Santa. What was more interesting is the amount of damages he requested. He stated he believed that Best Buy owed him at least $25 million because Christmas was ruined. His daughter will never believe in Santa again, and now he has to deal with her being a real pain now. I did not believe he had any type of recourse against Best Buy for inadvertently demolishing his daughter's belief in Santa, but even if I did, our client could not help him. I informed him that we only handled family law issues, and he should call the local bar association's lawyer referral service. He stated the bar association already told him they would not take his case. Then he proceeded to ask if I had children. I told him I did not. Then he proceeded to wish that all of my future kids have their belief in Santa Claus ruined. He stated that he would not help me if that happened. He then told me to F off and left. The whole time I was wondering how this guy's daughter believed in Santa Claus until age 12. Wait, back it up. Hold on a second. Are you telling me that there is no Santa Claus? Story 10. Had a fellow call my office and tell me he wanted our firm to handle negotiations with some of the big companies in the vinyl siding industry. I figured he had some new product that he wanted to sell or license. But no, when he came in, he disclosed that he had discovered a defect in the vinyl siding and actually wanted us to demand a large sum of money from these companies, or else he was going to disclose this defect to the news. Turns out he was a day laborer who had just recently been assigned to a construction project and discovered that you can cut vinyl house siding with a sharp knife, which is the way it is actually cut on site to be installed. The siding is supposed to be installed over a plywood backing, but his boss told him to skip putting up the backing panels to save money. He felt that homeowners were in danger because, without the wood backing, criminals could use this knowledge to enter people's houses. And he felt it was his solemn duty to report this to the public. That is, unless the vinyl siding companies were to cough up a bunch of cash. Basically, his employer was scamming customers, and he felt that justified his extortion of the manufacturers and wanted us to legitimize his efforts to extort money from his industry. It was a little uncomfortable to point out that, in fact, he and his boss were the criminals and that he really didn't have a case. Story 11. A company wants me to patent their competitor's slogan, arguing it has no trademark registration. When I explained to them that a slogan is not protectable by patent, that slogans cannot be deposited for trademark registration, and that patents and trademarks are two very distinct forms of monopoly, they asked me to apply for a generic intellectual property over the slogan. I then proceeded to explain there is no generic intellectual property, and that although there would be ways to protect that subject matter, not every IP right is acquired through registration. This means, as I explained, the competitor holds protection over the slogan. Moreover, I explained that their request is majorly unlawful. They did not budge. I ended up explaining to them about ethics and being very firm about refusing to honor their request. Our contract is now rescinded. It must have been frustrating to have to explain this to a company, but in the end, it was important to stick to your principles and not participate in something that was clearly unethical. Plus, it must have felt good to cut ties with a client who clearly didn't understand or respect the rules. Story 12. I practice in an urban area in the American South. I met with a man a few years ago who was certain that his mother's lawyer had embezzled funds from trust accounts, of which he was the beneficiary. He was in my office with a friend and seemed reasonably well adjusted at first. He was about 40, African American, and seemed nice enough, so I listened attentively to his concerns. Then it started to descend into madness as I asked him about the trust and why it was established. He told me with a completely honest tone and straight face that it was his money he'd made in the recording industry as a child. I thought this could be interesting. Still, thinking the man across the table from me was sane, I asked what type of music he'd recorded. That's when he dropped the real truth on me. He was actually Michael Jackson, the Michael Jackson, the king of pop. I told him that he couldn't be, since Jackson had recently died. He immediately, and without hesitation, proceeded to explain that when I'd heard that Jackson died, he actually awakened, back in this, his real body. He had always been Michael Jackson, but had to hide out in the other body for years. Not wanting to contradict this seemingly unhinged man unnecessarily, I played along for a bit and continued asking questions about the trust and his past. But there was more. This man proceeded to describe to me the custody battle he was having with his baby's mother, who was in fact Serena Williams. He told me about the time in a hotel bar in Dallas that Michael Jordan, yes, Michael Jordan, had confided in him that he was actually his real father. Of course, this conversation happened while having drinks with his good old friend Tiger Woods. I was floored. He was clear-eyed and didn't seem to understand the influence of anything. If he hadn't just said the things that he'd said, you would never know he wasn't there at all. I talked to his friend who knew he was a singer but hadn't talked to him about any other musical issues and referred him to a DHS counselor to see on his way home. Still my strangest meeting. It went on for over 2 hours. Turns out though, upon looking up the trust case he mentioned, that he actually did have some money stolen from a guardianship account by an attorney who is currently serving time for such nefarious activities. So who knows? Maybe it was all true. I have my doubts though. Thanks for watching until the end. If you happen to be a lawyer or are any part of the justice system and have a story similar to these, please leave it in the comments below. We'd love to read it. As for everyone else, please don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so that you know when our next video is available. For more videos like this one right now, please stop by our channel. Thanks again, and see you next time.